On this episode of Urban U, CUNY brought 30 dreamers on an emotional study abroad trip to Mexico. Amid current immigration enforcement, this story is even more relevant today. A Myanmar student escaped a repressive regime and found her path from Queensborough Community College to a Ph.D. in chemistry at the Grad Center. A new LaGuardia and Wagner Archives exhibit explores the historic fight for New York City's gay rights bill. And in our CUNY Authors series, meet a CUNY professor whose work on genocide and human rights has earned global recognition. All that and more, welcome to Urban U.
Since the 2024 presidential election results, uncertainty abounds for more than 500,000 people who have DACA status. People who were brought to the U.S. as children and were given protection from deportation under the Obama administration. The first Trump administration tried to rescind DACA, but failed. However, President-elect Trump's promise to unleash mass deportations has observers watching DACA closely. Before the election, we met with one dreamer who just before these uncertain times got to experience another dream, to simply cross the border and return.
Being disconnected from my family in Mexico did not let me go back to see them because I thought that I would feel a stranger.
Adela Zamora was born in Mexico. Her parents brought her to the U.S. when she was 8 years old. 30 years later, she took a break from working at her family's store to go visit the homeland.
The dream is always to go back to our country together, but since that's not possible, and I'm the only one that could go back with this special permission with an advance parole, I figured, why not?
Advance parole allows undocumented people to visit their native country and return to their adopted one, including for educational reasons. That's why CUNY and partners organized a study abroad trip for 30 DACA students and alumni, aka dreamers, to Mexico.
And the beauty of it was a community building event. It's for them to have an academic experience, a cultural experience, and the most important thing is for them to go back to a country they hadn't seen in a long time and meet family members that they left when they were babies.
Jesus Perez of the Immigrant Student Success Office at Brooklyn College says the trip was especially enriching for the students with DACA status. That refers to the 2012 Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program that protects immigrants who arrived in the U.S. as children from deportation.
Our office had been wanting to do this trip, but we wanted to have partners that would allow us to provide this service without charging the students, right?
A hodgepodge of organizations, including CUNY Citizenship Now, Mixteca, and the Hispanic Federation, worked together. They helped raise the funds and clear the legal channels for the endeavor. Zamora graduated from Queens College back in 2019, but by chance, she learned of the opportunity through a friend.
I have a lot of customers coming into my parents' business, and one of these customers is Araceli Ortega.
Zamora's friend Ortega went on a similar trip through Lehman College's Mexican Studies program.
She didn't invite me then because she didn't know I was a DACA recipient. And I didn't know she was a DACA recipient either. So mainly because those are very personal things that we don't usually just tell anyone. We all finally landed in Mexico. It felt so good. It felt like being at home, being surrounded by your own people. Everywhere you looked at, you saw your own people and the language. And everyone is so nice, so much respect.
So once we got to Mexico, there was a cultural enriching experience, whether we went to the National Museum or we went to the pyramids in Teotihuacan, when we went to visit universities. We had a whole day conference with our students and students at the university in Iberoamericana, where the students got to talk about binational issues and about their essence as documented students in the United States. So it was really powerful.
It was in all museums, conferences, and landmark sites. It got personal in Puebla, Mexico's fourth largest city, the origin of most Mexican New Yorkers.
A lot of our students are from Puebla, so we went and we purposely had the exchange, the academic program take place in Puebla to make sure that the students were able to connect with their families, once they were there.
I cried because I was looking at an image. I was looking at something that my parents yearned for so long to see. My grandmother, she's 98 years old, and she's very strong. She leaves home 7 a.m., comes back home 8, 9 p.m. She walks around the pueblo all day long, and I was glad that I was walking with her, being with her, talking with her, and just making her company. My grandfather from my mom's side, everyone calls him Papa Juan, and I risk it. I dare myself to call him abuelito. But I treated him with so much respect, and he lets me call him abuelito. So now every time that I call him back, I call him abuelito.
So we had 30 participants, and each one of them has their own narrative, their own story, and you can tell how they can say, oh, I also belong to this culture. I also belong to this history. I come from people that have, a long past and contributions to humanity, made it very special for all of them.
Shannon Ayala for Urban U.
I remember there was a group of men at the corner of 93rd and Broadway, and they all hung out together right on the stoop there. And as I would pass them by on the way to the subway, they would yell out at me and say hello, and I would say hello back. But they would say the word maricon. I was telling the story to somebody at one of the jobs I was working at, and she said, "Do you know what maricon means?" I said, "No, isn't it like marzipan, like a sweet dessert?" She goes, "No, maricon means butterfly, but in Spanish, it's the derogatory term for a gay man. It's like faggot. So they're not being nice to you. They're saying something that isn't very nice at all."
I was fired from 3 schools from teaching, each time because they found that I was gay, 2 private schools and city school. And I kind of gave up after that on my teacher's license.
Taking the city as a whole, it was not a gay-friendly city. You know, it was acceptable that if a gay got beaten in the street somewhere and left to die or go to the hospital or something like that, that didn't get anybody terribly upset.
LaGuardia and Wagner Archives' new online exhibit, The Battle for Intro to the New York City Gay Rights Bill, 1971 to 1986, tells the story of the fight for gay rights in New York City by those who lived it. After the riots at the Stonewall Inn on June 29, 1969, gay people in New York City decided they would no longer accept the violence and oppression that had become a part of their everyday lives.
To be gay in New York in the 60s and 70s was to live a double life. You might get fired from your job, you might get kicked out of your own home. Until 1973, the American Psychiatric Association classified homosexuality as a mental illness. After Stonewall, we see the formation of many gay and lesbian organizations. people coming together like the Gay Liberation Front, the Gay Activists Alliance. The GAA ultimately established their headquarters at a place called the Firehouse, and they advocated for gay rights. They lobbied legislators, but they also held these Saturday night dances, and these afforded the opportunity for young people to find camaraderie and community.
The minute I walked in the door at the Firehouse, I knew I had found home. See, when I grew up as a gay kid, I thought I was the only one in the world. And meeting hundreds and maybe thousands of people at the Firehouse was just the most incredible experience of my life.
One of the first objectives of these activists was to establish a gay Bill of Rights in New York City. That bill was originally known as Intro 475.
The Gay Rights Bill was meant to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation in housing, employment, and public accommodations. And New York was the first city to propose a gay rights bill in January 1971, but the 51st city to pass in 1986. And this exhibit tries to answer the question, what took so long?
It was a fundamentally controversial bill because it would have made such enormous changes in the society. It basically would have brought under the protection of the government a group that was universally scorned.
And those voting in favor of the bill were often subject to hostile outside pressures.
I had pickets around my house. I had the police. I had to leave my house with my family because there were people marching up and down the street, circling my home. I was scared. I mean, I'll be honest. I was scared and really worried about, my political future, my family being harassed and stuff. It was the most difficult period of my life.
A key opponent in the council was Tom Cute, the powerful majority leader of City Council from Brooklyn. He was majority leader from 1969 to 1985. The Catholic Church was a powerful force in New York City politics in the 1970s and 1980s, and he was deeply influenced by Catholicism.
The hierarchy of the church opposed the bill, which they saw as, rewarding sin or some such thing.
Fernando Ferrer, who was the City Council Bronx chairperson, he called me up to know, would he be excommunicated from the Catholic Church if he voted for the bill?
But it wasn't just the church.
The fire department, the police department, they often made the argument that, having a gay police officer, a gay firefighter would undermine morale, that having a gay firefighter sleep at the firehouse would cause disruption, and they certainly weren't willing to negotiate. And they, in effect, bottled up the gay rights bill.
And many felt Ed Koch, the mayor during most of this period, did not push hard enough for the bill.
In this exhibit, Ed Koch is the most contested figure. Some people defend his record on gay rights, other people denounce him.
He did what he, quote unquote, could do for us, but there was no way he was going to compromise his privileged position as mayor.
Gay rights was important, but I think more sinister and even diabolical was his silence around AIDS. And unfortunately at that time, the two were intrinsically linked.
The turning point was 1985. Tom Cute retired as majority leader. Ed Koch is elected for his third term. There's a new city council, a new, more assertive city council. And the question is now, who will become the new speaker of the city council? And Koch told Vallone, I will support your candidacy for speaker if you allow the bill to get out of the committee to get a full floor vote. This is a quid pro quo deal in New York City politics. Vallone agrees, and it's passed by a margin of 21-14.
This legislation simply says that people with that lifestyle have rights. And you don't have to love them, but you have to respect their rights.
I hope that people who view the exhibit will understand how difficult it often is to make social change. Many people would just give up, but it's remarkable to get a sense of the stories of these activists who persisted, who persevered against tremendous odds to get this bill finally passed.
I'm Scott Kirby for Urban U.
Still up on Urban U, a Lehman College professor reveals untold stories of genocide and human rights in Guatemala. But first, a story of resilience, from escaping a repressive regime to thriving at a CUNY community college and excelling in groundbreaking chemistry research. Stay with us for these stories and more.
As a student, I was very dissatisfied with the education system in Myanmar. Unfortunately, there's no creative credence in Myanmar's education. It was extraordinarily difficult for one to carry out new discovery in education, science, medicine, and technology.
So this is a mass spectrometer. So we have like 5 different chambers, and this is the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth.
May has been working in this lab for 3 years. She explains that experimental scientific work is not possible in her home country of Myanmar.
Go through this whole chamber, and this is a reaction center, we call it. So the resources are very limited. Their education base is pretty much focused on rote memorization, teacher-centered instruction. You will not have a freedom for the critical thinking. You have to do what you are told to do. To be honest, we don't have actual science research program in my country. I feel like they forbid you to do any innovative stuff scientifically.
May recalls the strict guidelines for students and teachers enforced during the years she grew up under Myanmar's military dictatorship.
It's very oppressive. If you were to go against him, you will face the consequences. If you're in high school, if you want to be creative, and then you will write differently than what you are taught to do, you might be risking your own grade. Most students will follow the instruction instead. This is what the education system in Myanmar.
With the encouragement of her parents and the stars aligning for her to emigrate to the United States, May made the voyage across the ocean when she was 17.
I left my mother and father behind, and I came here with my brother. So I'm the eldest of 4 siblings.
She moved to Northern Boulevard in Queens and enrolled in high school, not knowing any English. 2 years later, she started at Queensborough Community College.
When I first came, I did not know any English, and that was one thing, is language barrier. It's hard for me to navigate people. And also in the education system, I was enrolled in this honor program in STEM. And that's where I met my first mentor, who gave me the opportunity to do the research with him. From there, I started to experience or developed my communication through this attending seminar and then all those presentations that I have to deliver to the public.
At Queens College, May earned not only a bachelor's degree, but a master's degree as well, working in Professor Timothy Short's lab. And now, she works in her mentor Jianbo Liu's mass spectrometry lab in the Queens College Science Building, deep into her investigations on molecules and chemical biophysics.
Not only he would teach me how to do the experiment or trying to find a way to troubleshoot the experiment, he also talked about how in the life that you need to apply these experiences. In life, nothing's gonna come out as you expected, because so you have to always find your own path.
May's education has led to the publication of 11 scholarly articles, and she recently won a Mina Reese Dissertation Fellowship, a prestigious award which aims to financially aid those finishing their graduate work.
That's why we use this machine to identify the molecules, because this solution, you can't even really see what's in there.
For May, these experiments might lead to molecular DNA breakthroughs for the greater good.
This experience, I will apply it or contribute it into the work that I'm gonna be doing in the future, and then make a positive impact to the society that's related to medicine or any scientific innovations or any instrumental development. I will become a research scientist for sure, but what field I will be going into that's gonna be the big question mark. I couldn't believe that I'm doing this right now, because 16 years old me is just don't know what I'm trying to do in the future.
For Urban U, I'm Craig Thompson.
El acusado José Efraín Ríos Montt es responsable como autor del delito de genocidio. Por tal delito se le impone la pena de 50 años de prisión inconmutables.
Well, if you want to think about the genocide in Guatemala, you have to go back to 1954, which is when there was a democratically elected president, Jacobo Arbenz, and there was a US-backed coup that overthrew him. And that coup in 1954 that overthrew a democratically elected president set in motion decades of military dictatorships. My name is Victoria Sanford. I am an anthropologist, a public scholar. I've been working in Guatemala since 1990. I started doing research on violence in Guatemala, on the forced recruitment of Mayan youth into the army. And then I became involved with exhumations of mass cemeteries with the Guatemalan Forensic Anthropology Foundation. In the early 1990s, before the peace accords were signed, those were signed in '96, and I've written books about the peace process, about the importance of the Truth Commission. I worked with the Guatemalan Forensic Anthropology Foundation on their report to the Truth Commission. I've probably taken about 500 testimonies from survivors of massacres and other forms of state violence in Guatemala. I think I've written six books, a couple of edited volumes as well. And it's all part of trying to tell the story and accompanying the people I know from Guatemala in their search for justice. From 1954 forward, we know this now from declassified documents that are available through the National Security Archive. And these declassified documents show us that the US was involved with a military dictatorship, but also was very well aware of violence that was happening on the ground in Guatemala at the time. After the coup takes place, the US continues advising these military officers, and there are discussions in the early 1960s in Guatemala, and it's not just in Guatemala because it's also El Salvador and Nicaragua, Honduras, Colombia, and there are these meetings that take place between US advisors and police and military for all of these countries together. And what they're doing is consolidating the relationships between the police and the armies so that the army isn't outward facing for the defense of sovereignty. The army is inward facing in collusion with the police to police the people to not do anything to challenge the corrupt military government. The reason that people were disappeared is to sow terror. Right? And there's a standard way that these disappearances take place, right? Sometimes people get warnings, but oftentimes they don't, right? They're targeted. They're targeted to sow fear among different groups of people. So first you disappear members of the Guatemalan Workers' Party, right? In 1966. People who were in the Guatemalan Workers' Party, one of them was Rafael Tischler, who was also the head of the National Teachers Union, right? they killed him. They hunted him down and they killed him. And we know that from declassified documents, but we also know the US government was preparing for this campaign because there are articles in newspapers. I even found an article in the El Paso Times mentioning Sergio Tischler. These are articles that are planted by the US government, right? To say that there are communists in Guatemala because this is during the Cold War. It's the discourse of the Cold War, the othering of anyone who speaks for social justice, right? And Rios Montt said in 1982 when he was asked about his scorched earth policy, which was what the massacres were, you kill all the people, burn all the crops, burn all the houses, destroy everyone. He said, we don't have a scorched earth policy, we have a policy of scorched communists. You silence any land rights issues, people are starving. So there's a whole like snowball effect when you disappear people, and you also leave people with no body to mourn, right? And these cases that have been ongoing, like the case of Marco Antonio Molina Thyssen in Guatemala, who was also disappeared when he was a kid. He was 14 years old. He was having lunch with his mother in their home, and military men without uniforms, with no identification, burst into the home, took him away, knocked her down, wouldn't let her out, left with him, and she could think of nothing to do except write down the license plate of that vehicle. And it's during the time that the United Nations mission in Guatemala, Managua, was there, and they were preparing for the Truth Commission, and they were starting to get some limited access to government documents in the post-Peace Accord era, that license plate number was identified as the plate of a military vehicle. The current situation of the families of the disappeared today in Guatemala is that they're still looking for their loved ones. It's incredibly moving and deeply sad to see that the mother of Marco Antonio Molina Thyssen is still searching for him today, more than 40 years after he was disappeared, right? And that there is no justice. Because at the end of the day, impunity is the violation of the law by those who are charged with upholding it. So it's not just, because people will think, oh, impunity, it means you can get away with crime. Well, kind of. But what it really means is the people who are supposed to be adjudicating justice are the ones who are committing crimes, which is currently the case in Guatemala with the current Attorney General, who is corrupt and is on every list of corrupt actors in the United States, in Europe, and elsewhere. But she's holding on to what is the equivalent of the Justice Department in Guatemala with an iron fist, because that is the only way the oligarchy can protect itself right now. There's a very powerful image of Marco Antonio's mother at her husband's grave, she's asking her deceased husband if he's found their son. And I think that pain that people live with is so deep and so profound, and it continues living on with them. And for those of us who accompany people, it impacts us all as well, because we care deeply about them and profoundly believe and are committed to their right to truth and justice in their lifetime.
That's all for our show. For more episode highlights and sneak peeks into our upcoming stories, meet us on our social media platforms. Thank you for watching these stories from the largest university in the nation, the City University of New York.